and lo and behold, the people of Israel entered the land of Israel. Okay, so that's very exciting. We're in the land of Israel. And wait, I wanted to do another share of this, but we are already recording, just so you know. And today we were reading chapter 5. You see the text there, and you could also follow here if you want. Okay, give these out here and here. Feel free to give these out. When all the kings of the Amorites on the western side of the Jordan and all the Canaanites near the sea heard how God had dried up the waters of the Jordan for the sake of the Israelites until they crossed over, they lost heart, and no spirit was left in them because of the Israelites. Okay, so this is the opening verse of chapter 5. Now the people of Israel have entered into the land, and everyone got the news. Everyone knows there's a new kid on the block, okay, and they're worried. They're worried because they heard about the Israelites and all the battles that they waged in the desert, winning over the Amorites and the Sichon and all these other nations. And now they're worried what's going to happen. And they also heard rumors about this God, the God of Israel, that promised the land to these Israelites. It's their land. And so it's not our land. We thought it's our land. Where were these people all along? Well, they were slaves in Egypt for 400 years, okay? But now they're back. And now they want their land that was promised to them by God. And they're also fearful because they heard that God got them out of Egypt and walked them through the desert for 40 years, and they made it, and they survived, and they got this thing that's called the Torah. Okay, and all these values and all these weird values of worshiping a God that you can't see. We're all worshiping gods, we're worshiping stone and the sun and trees and things like that. And they're going to change everything, these Israelites. Okay, they don't want them around, but they're very fearful, and they're trying to think, what are we going to do to fight against them? And we're going to see throughout the rest of the book of Joshua, not today, but we're going to see all these wars that Joshua is forced to wage against the local nations that are in the land of Canaan, the land of Israel. Okay, but we're going to see that later on. But that's going to be a big part of the book of Joshua. But this is a hint saying that they are worried and concerned about the Israelites being in the land, and there's going to be war later on. But a moment before that happens, okay, because that's going to start in chapter 6. Next week, we're going to talk about chapter 6 is going to be the Battle of Jericho. Okay, don't tell anyone how, we keep that a secret. We're going to talk about that next week, okay? But that's going to be the first of the battles. So a moment before the Battle of Jericho, a lot of interesting things are happening in today's chapter, in chapter 5, that are more about like the local issues of the Israelites. Okay, so the first one is here at verse 2. Okay, so we're chapter 5, verse 2. Okay, it's on page 5 also. It so happens to be. Or you can see the screen also, right? It's big enough. Okay. At that time, God said to Joshua, make flint knives and proceed with the second circumcision of the Israelites. What? Second circumcision of the Israelites. What does that mean?
Sounds good to me.
Hopefully.
So Joshua sounds good to you because you're not a
Exactly.
Okay, the men, it doesn't sound so good.
These would have been all the sons of the.
Wait, we're gonna, So Joshua had flint knives made, and the Israelites were circumcised at Givat aralot. Okay, so there is this unbelievable and unprecedented event happening. The moment they get into the land of Israel, God says, Joshua, you need to circumcise the people of Israel. Okay, and I think everyone's like talking about like why do they have to get circumcised? Okay, were they not circumcised until then? Why is this a second circumcision? Okay, are they doing something? Maybe the first circumcision wasn't correct. What is going on? And it happens at a place that's called Giv'ata Arolot. Orla, okay, is the foreskin from the bris, from the circumcision, the foreskin. So the foreskins they put on that hill and they named it that hill. So you can just imagine how that day looked, okay, and a lot of pain and agony for all these men also, right? But now we have to ask ourselves, why is this happening? And the Torah is also explaining this to us, okay? This is the reason why Joshua had the circumcision performed. All the people who had come out of Egypt, all the males of military age, had died during the desert wanderings after leaving Egypt. So the ones that left Egypt were circumcised in Egypt. Now, whereas all such people who came out of Egypt had been circumcised, none of those born after the Exodus during the desert wanderings had been circumcised. Wow, this is great. This is unbelievable news. The Israelites are walking through the desert and not circumcising their sons. Okay? They did it while slaves in Egypt for 400 years. They circumcised their sons, but suddenly, during the 40 years in the desert, everyone that was born during the 40 years is not circumcising. That is pretty shocking news, right?
Yeah.
It's even more shocking when you think about that when they were in slavery, when they were in distress, not free people, they did it, okay? And it's kind of like, I don't like to bring in, you always like to compare history, but I'm just thinking, like when the people of Israel were in exile, okay, for all these years in Europe, or in Arab countries and under distress, they always circumcised their males. Okay, but you see, as Jews are becoming more and more free and more, part of the general society, you do hear more and more people are like, yeah, we're not going to do circumcision. It's sort of like something of the past. So we seeing this kind of like trend happening here as well?
Yes.
In the Bible? Maybe they feel, oh, we're free, we're going somewhere else or something like that. That might be one reason. Another reason is that the Torah is telling us here at verse 6, for the Israelites had traveled in the wilderness 40 years until the entire nation, the men of military age who had left Egypt, had perished because they had not obeyed God, and God had sworn never to let them see the land that God had sworn to their fathers to assign to us, a land flowing with milk and honey. But God had raised up their sons in their stead, and it was these that Joshua circumcised, for they were uncircumcised, not having circumcised on the way. Okay, so this explanation, there are two explanations. One is kind of like hidden in the text, is maybe wandering through the desert didn't really give them the stability or the ability to do the circumcision. Maybe in the desert, maybe, when you're traveling from one place to the other, maybe it was harder to do it. I don't know. Okay. But the reason that's really here is like the reason the people of Israel had to wander for 40 years, okay, is because they did not obey God. Okay, they didn't do the right thing. One of them was not circumcised their sons. They disobeyed God. They went against Moses all the time. That's why God does not let anyone that left Egypt go into the land of Israel. That entire generation is kind of like doomed, and they died in the desert. But their children that were not circumcised, those are the ones that Joshua is circumcising on that day as they enter the land of Israel. Okay, is that clear?
Well, Joshua is a Moil also.
He's also a moil. He's got a lot of work to do
Additional
that day. Yeah, yeah.
I always thought that the wandering was part of, to get rid of that generation of slaves who had a certain mentality of not being free men, you know, and then coming into Israel as free men and without that background.
That's a possibility. That's true to look at it that way. But maybe because of that slave mentality, they also disobeyed God and didn't, follow His rules. Maybe, I don't know. But that's definitely a possibility.
Rabbi,
So yes,
do you think the Amorites and the other kingdoms in the area were aware of the God of Israel before the Israelites got there?
before they got there, I don't know. I think they heard about them in the desert,
Mhm.
because the Bible tells us in a few places that the kings in Canaan heard about the Israelites traveling throughout the desert. Okay.
Well, Moab and Amram.
Yeah, they say that. We've heard it. Okay. So after the circumcising of the whole nation was completed, they remained where they were in the camp until they recovered. And God said to Joshua, "Today I have rolled away from you the disgrace of Egypt." So that place was called Gilgal, as it still is. I'll explain that a little bit more in depth later. Okay. So going now to the PowerPoint presentation, and can people on Zoom, if you cannot see the PowerPoint presentation, let me know. Okay. But one of the questions asked by the commentaries is, why was it so urgent for Joshua to circumcise the people immediately upon entering the land? And what does this act symbolize? So one of the most meaningful ways to connect between different books of the Bible is by adding details in one book about events that occurred in the past and were described in another. And here in our chapter, we are informed that the Israelites were not able to fulfill the commandments of circumcision during their years in the wilderness. Okay, and now explaining the reason we just I'm not going to read what we just read in the Bible, but because of the dangers involved in the journey, the commandment of circumcision was withheld from the newborns. This central and essential detail is not mentioned in the Torah, and only now, as the matter is being corrected, do we learn of it in the book of Joshua. Okay, so the Torah does not tell us they were not circumcised. The book of Joshua tells us they were circumcised. That's the connection between the two things. Okay, and this central, according to the sages, Chazal, part of the nation, primarily the tribe of Levi, the Levites, did in fact perform circumcision, but not all the people did so in the proper manner. The major rectification brought about through Joshua occurred at the place from now on would be called Givat Ha'aralot, the hill of the foreskins, but that is not all. In our chapter, the text reiterates the reason why the Israelites wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, okay? And that's because they did not behave according to God's commandments, okay? So it is true that in the Bible, the word goy, Gentile, applies to any people or nation, but its use here is in reference to the people of Israel, and it's not accidental. It appears that this entire process is meant to strengthen the essential sense that the book of Joshua is truly a direct and integral continuation of the 5 books of the Torah. It is Joshua who reveals to us a crucial and central detail about Israel's life in the wilderness regarding the mitzvah of circumcision. He is the one who connects this matter to the failure of the Israelites in the episodes of the spies and leaves us with the insight that without the special covenant with the Creator, Israel, heaven forbid, could be regarded as just another nation among the nations, uncircumcised. Thus, entry into the land is a great opportunity to return to our roots, and there is no point in settling the land without full faith-based commitment. Okay, so the circumcision happens as they enter the land because that signifies the renewal of the covenant with God. Okay, if they would go into the land not circumcised, they would be like any other nation. Okay, so the circumcision is sort of like the how do we say circumcision in Hebrew? Brit, right? Brit is covenant. Okay, so it's renewing the covenant with God. Okay, and that was a nice commentary by Professor Myron Isaacson. Another commentary is the entry into the land of Israel is accompanied by the construction of identity. The old identity of the generation of the wilderness must undergo transformation in order to be capable of facing the new tasks. A new person is not an erasure of the old, rather it embodies the ability to draw anew, to begin again, to face new challenges. This process begins with a renewed covenant. Yeah, that was a question?
If they were not circumcised, God has no obligation to support them during these battles.
Right. And that's the renewal of the covenant also from God's side. Exactly. So circumcision is a form of surgery. Unlike the covenant imposed on helpless infants, here we are presented with a conscious operation undertaken by adults. It is the creation of a shared wound. It is a moment of vulnerability, a moment of great weakness that demands healing. Because when you circumcise an adult, it's very difficult surgery, okay, especially with the way they did it back then. Okay.
There must have been a lot of flint there at the.
Oh yeah, this is the moment when the wilderness ends, near the conclusion of the wanderings. There are no oaths sworn or on swords. The manna ceases to fall, and now one must eat from the fruit of the land, from the fruit of labor. Okay, so this nice commentary by Mukitzur, okay, is also a secular commentator on the Bible, is really kind of like telling us that it's a hard thing to do, the circumcision, but the act of doing it, of this physical act, is kind of like showing they're not going to be taken anymore by hand in the desert for 40 years. The manna keeps falling, food is brought to them. Now they're in the land of Israel, they have to work the land. And part of that is also the circumcision, which symbolizes that kind of like hard work through the surgery that they're doing. So another thing interesting, okay, our chapter depicts the circumcision. Could we turn on the air conditioning?
Really?
Yeah, right, it's warm. I think Larry knows how to do it. Okay. Right, it's a little bit warm.
And when you close the door, you lift it.
No, I think you have to keep the door closed because of the school that's there. They're making a lot of noise.
Right.
So our chapter depicts the circumcision of those Israelites who had not actually made the exodus from Egypt, but had been born in the desert when the practice of circumcision lapsed of 40 years. Okay. The Midrash, okay, which is the rabbi's commentary, elaborates on this episode, making it the basis for a custom that is practiced to this day, Kiseh Eliyahu, the chair of Elijah the prophet. Have you seen this custom? The chair of Elijah in the Brith? Have you ever seen that custom? Okay.
Well, yeah, you do that. We have that chair
In the Beit Midrash.
was used for.
Right, not exactly like this, but we also have a beautiful chair at C&T. So when there's a Brith, you put the godfather, the sandak, okay, he sits on that chair, and the child is presented to him there, and that's where the circumcision happens. Why do we have the Elijah chair? Okay, so our chapter depicts the circumcision of those Israelites who had not actually. Oh, I'm sorry. How did this come about that we have the Elijah chair? The people of Israel continued to practice circumcision throughout the period of the conquest of the promised land until the leadership of Joshua and the judges, and throughout the period of the united monarchy. But when the kingdom divided after the reign of King Solomon, the northern kingdom, reign of King Solomon, the northern kingdom of Israel ceased practicing circumcision. Okay, so this was like a big split between the two kingdoms. The northern kingdom did not follow God's law. They were idol worshippers. And the southern kingdom, okay, the Judeans, which by the way, the Jews afterwards are named after them, okay, they were the ones that kept God's commandments, and they continued the circumcisions. But the Israelites in the northern kingdom did not follow that, and they did not keep circumcision. Okay, so Elijah the prophet was zealous for the covenant of the Brit Milah, the circumcision, prayed for a cessation of rain and dew as punishment for this violation of God's commandment. Isabel, the evil queen of the northern kingdom, sought to have Elijah killed. So like those before him, Jacob, Moses, and David, Elijah fled for his life. He came to Mount Horeb in the desert of Sinai, where the Torah had been given to Israel, and hid out in a cave there. God appeared to him there and asked, "What are you doing here?" Elijah answered, "I have been very zealous, that is, zealous for continuing the practice of circumcision." Okay, so Elijah is basically telling God that your people are not observing circumcision, your people are terrible, and I was zealous for the practice of circumcision. They didn't follow it, they wanted to kill me, so I fled. Okay, so as a reward, God vowed, or as a punishment, God vowed to Elijah that whenever the children of Israel make the sign of the circumcision in their flesh, Elijah will be present. Therefore, the rabbinic sages instituted the custom that people should make a seat of honor for the angel of the covenant, Elijah. For it is Elijah the prophet who is called the agent of the covenant, Malach HaBrit, and it is said, and the angel of the covenant is whom you delight. Behold, he comes. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord, and he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers. So to this day, it is the custom to place a specially decorated chair in the room where the circumcision is taking place, to make a place for the Elijah the prophet, the angel of the covenant of circumcision to be present at the ceremony. Okay, so basically you could look at it as a reward, but also it's like God was telling Elijah, you claim that the people of Israel are not doing circumcision, you're sort of like bad-mouthing them. I'm going to make you go to every bris, okay, and sit there, and there'll be a special chair, and you'll be there, and you'll see that they are actually doing it. Okay, so you can't complain about them. So this is a nice commentary by Professor Mark Bregman.
I've been to Sunday 4 times.
Really? Wow, that's a big.
That's
a big,
because the fathers
thing.
would not sit and watch.
Okay,
Well, I have my grandson when he was.
Yeah.
Circumcised.
so
They were Sunday.
and the last thing I want to say is like the word Gilgal. Okay, Gilgal means to roll over. Okay, and this is what God does. He rolls over the disgrace of Egypt by doing the circumcision. To them, they're sort of like cleansing, and now they are reuniting with God and following God's ways through that. Okay, that's the first item in our chapter. Next, and God said to Joshua, verse 10. Encamped at Gilgal in the steppes of Jericho, the Israelites offered the Passover sacrifice on the 14th day of the month toward evening. On the day after the Passover offering, on that very day, they ate of the produce of the country, unleavened bread and parched grain. Okay, so what do we have here? What is this talking about?
What's that?
Yeah, but before that,
Well,
okay,
they were eating the manna.
when is
before.
this happening? The Israelites offered the Passover sacrifice on the 14th day of the month toward the evening. Okay,
That's the start of Passover.
so that's the day before Passover, which is the 14th day. Okay, and Passover begins on the 15th at midnight. Okay, that's sort of like when the people of Israel left the land of Egypt. And after the first day of Passover, what happens? The Seder. And what happens then? You go back to life, or do you keep eating matzah?
No, 7 days.
7 days. It's a holiday of 7 days, right? There's no mentioning of this here in the book of Joshua. Passover is not mentioned in this chapter. That is pretty shocking that the most important holiday in the Jewish tradition, okay,
But they
is
didn't,
not mentioned in the book of Joshua.
did the Israelites practice Passover while they were in the desert? I thought they didn't.
Well, they did. They probably, well, that's a good question, but it says so. It says in the Bible, it says in the Torah, okay, you shall eat matzah, you shall, eat matzah for 7 days to symbolize leaving the land of Egypt. Okay, so basically, what we're less aware of today, they're kind of like two holidays attached to Passover. One holiday is the holiday on the 14th of Nisan, okay, which is the Passover sacrifice, okay, and then on the 15th of Nisan is the holiday of the 7 days of Passover. Okay, so it's like two holidays that are kind of like attached. Why don't we know about the holiday of the 14th? We don't observe it anymore, because that's a holiday that's connected to the temple and to the sacrifice. We don't do sacrifices anymore, so we're not aware that back then it was a big holiday during the time of the temple and the time of the Torah. But what's more interesting and shocking, that the book of Joshua is only talking about that holiday of temple, the one on the 14th, and not talking about the holiday that we observe today, which is the 7 days of Passover.
Well,
Okay.
wasn't there the actual Passover and the ending of all of the firstborn was the day before they left.
Yeah, and that's when they do the Passover lamb.
But it happened in Egypt.
It happened in Egypt.
And when was the Torah given that said
The year after.
the year after?
Year after, yeah. So
Okay,
they're supposed to be
stop.
they're supposed to be keeping it for 40 days, for 40 years during the desert. But here, this is not mentioned. Okay, so I wanted to ask this question. So I went to ChatGPT. Okay, and I asked him that question. I asked, okay, you see here, why in Joshua chapter 5, we only have the holiday of the Passover sacrifice on the 14th day of the month toward evening, and missing is the holiday on the 15th of Nisan and the 7 days of Passover. Okay, and ChatGPT says, this is an excellent and insightful question. I like ChatGPT.
Yeah.
It's like he knows I have good questions.
We have
Okay.
an answer.
What?
We have an answer.
Let's see. Okay. Why does Joshua chapter 5 mention only the Passover sacrifice on the 14th of Nisan and not the full festival of Passover, which begins on the 15th and continues for 7 days. So we see, okay, the Pesach offering on the 14th of Nisan is mentioned explicitly, right? We just read it in the verse. On the 15th of Nisan, called here the day after the Passover, it's not even mentioned as its own holiday. They eat matzah and roasted grain, foods traditionally associated with Passover. But there's no explicit mention of a 7-day festival or refraining from chametz, okay, unleavened bread, or other laws of Passover. Okay, why is this week-long festival omitted? Here are a few possible explanations. Okay, so ChatGPT reframed my question even better. Okay, but it is a big question. Okay, and it's not just me and ChatGPT that are wondering about this. Many other commentators in the past. But I was testing him to see if he knew. If he needs, I have to tell you, I'm always so surprised about how insightful ChatGPT is. And I've seen once an article about someone studying Talmud with ChatGPT, and they were like a big scholar, and they said their level of studying is very, very impressive. Okay, so what are the reasons for not mentioning the holiday of Passover in our chapter, according to ChatGPT? And I brought some of the answers that I thought were good. Focus on the sacrifice as entry into covenant. The book of Joshua is emphasizing national renewal, circumcision, covenant, and the Korban Pesach, the Passover offering, which together signify re-entry into God's covenant, paralleling Exodus 12. That's where the story of Passover is first mentioned. The Torah emphasized that only the circumcised may eat the Passover sacrifice. Thus, this act had a symbolic purpose, claiming national and spiritual identity upon entering the land. The narrative's focus is on this covenantal moment, not on holiday rituals or temple-oriented practices like festival observances. Okay? Interesting. I don't fully accept this answer because you could still mention it, but the point here, we're not talking about the holidays and the rituals of the holidays. We're focusing on entering the land and the covenant and how the covenant is renewed. And the covenant is renewed with the circumcision, okay, with the covenant and the Passover offering, which was the one that they did in Egypt, just like Jerry suggested before. Okay. Second answer. No central sanctuary yet. While the Passover sacrifice can be offered in a communal setting, as was done in Egypt, the 7-day festival with its offering is, according to Deuteronomy, meant to be celebrated in the place God will choose, i.e. the future temple. Okay, it says in Deuteronomy 16, you may not offer the Passover sacrifice within any of your towns, but only at the place that the Lord your God will choose. So at this point in Joshua, there's no permanent sanctuary, and they are in transitional settlement. Therefore, the broader aspects of the holiday may not be emphasized or even observed in full. Okay, no point in mentioning the whole holiday of 7 days of Passover, because during that holiday, every day you need to sacrifice different sacrifice, a lamb or things like that. In the temple doesn't exist, so there's no point in yet mentioning it here in the Torah. That's actually not a bad.
So do we assume between the time of Joshua and when the temple was built, they didn't really celebrate Passover?
Yes, that's pretty shocking, but the Torah tells us this as well. I'm going to talk about it in a second. The fourth, I skipped the third because I didn't agree with him. I disagreed with the ChatGPT. Implied observance. It's possible that the full 7-day holiday was observed, but it is simply not mentioned because the text assumes the reader knows the laws from the Torah, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy. All these places it says you celebrate for 7 days. So there's no point in mentioning something that they're already doing anyhow. Why question this at all? Okay. The purpose of the passage is not legal or ritual instruction, but a milestone narrative. In other words, the silence doesn't imply non-observant, it just wasn't relevant to the point being made. Okay, this is not the time to talk about it. We talked about it in other places in the Torah. Okay, very interesting point, but also could be questioned as well, as you can understand. And number 5, historical reality of the first Passover in the land. Some scholars suggest that this first celebration may have been limited due to recent circumcision, which would make many temporary unfit. Military and logistical priorities, lack of infrastructure for full-scale festival observance. So perhaps only the core ritual, the Passover sacrifice and eating matzah was practiced. Okay? The people of Israel just walked into the land. They don't have time now to celebrate 7 days of Passover. Koshering their home takes a lot of time, right? Going to Pico Robertson and doing all the shopping and cleaning, okay, and inviting people for Passover and cooking for 30 people. That takes a lot of time, right? They didn't have that time. They were like about to conquer the land, and they were like busy with that,
and
right?
they also need to be healed.
And they're after circumcision, okay? They're like, we're not, this doesn't make sense to do that. And this reminds me of the very, very famous joke, right? This Christian family, okay, is like it lives in this Jewish shtetl in Romania, okay, and they see all the Jews observing Judaism, and they're like together as a community, and they're like, this is so wonderful. We want to convert as well, okay, and they come to the rabbi, and they say, we want to convert immediately. So he looks at the calendar. He says, why don't you come a month later? We're very busy now with this holiday. It's called Passover, etc. Come a month later. They're like, no, we want to be part of this holiday. We want to do everything, etc. We want to do it right now. So the rabbi says, okay, he circumcises all the male in the family. They all have to go to the mikveh, and they become Jewish. And then he tells them what they have to do for Passover. Okay, and there's like, oy vey. He's like, we should have waited a month later and converted back then. Okay, that's it. So if you ever want to, convert, you do it after Passover.
I think that it seems to me there's something subtle that's not mentioned, and that is, with the manna stopped, they were promised they were going into a land flowing with milk and honey, and the ability to now eat off of the land sort of fulfills that promise.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a moment. That's a good point. Okay. But as Larry said before, Passover was not actually celebrated during the first temple. And the reason we know that is because in the times of King Yoshiyahu, I think that's, and King Chizkiyahu, it actually says that since the time of Joshua, they did not celebrate Passover, which is kind of like shocking to think that the people of Israel didn't celebrate Passover when they were in the land of Israel. But there were a lot of issues. When we will study those books, the books of Kings, we'll get there maybe next year, maybe in 2 years. You have to come to hear those.
There was a lot of booty from the two countries that they wiped out, the Amorites and the Moabites.
Yeah.
So they took all of the grain from that, and whether or not it fed 670,000 people, we don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. But in any event, the connection between Passover and the circumcision, okay, is also very interesting, because according to the Torah, if you're not circumcised, you cannot take part in the Passover offering. So therefore, they entered the land of Israel on the 10th of Nisan. Okay, again, the 14th of Nisan is when you do the Passover sacrifice. So they they do the circumcision, they rest for kind of like 3 days recovering, and then they do the Passover lamb. Okay, so this is why it is happening here, or else they could not have done the Passover sacrifice. But the Passover sacrifices also symbolizes the freedom of the people of Israel. So when they are entering the land of Israel, that's when they are the most free. Freedom is fulfilled in their own land, not when they are slaves for sure, and not also when they are in the desert. Okay, they are free at last. Okay, in their own land. And the other connection here, suggested by this commentator, is that before returning to Egypt, if you remember, Moses, okay, has 2 sons, okay, and Tzipporah, his wife, is forced to circumcise not Moses, but their children, okay, or maybe even Moses, okay, and Moses agrees to return to Egypt, but he complained to God, and he says, "I have uncircumcised lips." Okay, so God reassures Moses by providing him the help of Aaron, his brother. Okay, so it's only after these 2 circumcisions of his sons and his lips that are uncircumcised in a metaphorical way, by bringing him Aaron, his brother, to speak for him, that Moses was able to take the people out of Egypt. And now, 40 plus years later, the people are about to embark on the final arc of the Exodus narrative, conquering the land. The people may be unsure about this task. By linking the circumcision and Passover, God reminds the people that Moses too was nervous and unsure of the task God set before him. But once he was circumcised, he led the nation out of Egypt. And the same is also for the Israelites as they go in. Okay, so it's sort of like giving them the strength. Don't worry, you'll be like Moses, and you'll be fine. Okay, so on that same day, when they ate of the produce of the land, the manna ceased. Okay, the Israelites got no more manna. That year they ate of the yield of the land of Canaan. Okay, so this is also very interesting. What's happening here? The manna that they got for 40 years, okay, it was like DoorDash, right? They just pressed the thing and it came to their doorstep. The manna fell from the sky, okay, and and the scholars say the manna had different tastes. People could imagine it wasn't bad. They got it every day. It was like a different taste, exactly like DoorDash. You invite you order one thing, it all tastes the same, right? But one tastes Italian, one day tastes Japanese, Chinese, or whatever. It's all food, but that's how the manna was. And lo and behold, they get into the land of Israel, and it stops. They have to be independent now. They're grown-ups, okay? Their commitment to God is shown through them needing to grow their own grains. They now are the ones that have to provide for themselves, okay? So that's a very big deal. And eating the first fruit of the land, the Omer, okay? It says in the verse before, they ate of the produce of the country, unleavened bread and parched grain. Okay, that's on Joshua 5:11. And they ate from the produce of the land on the day after the Passover, unleavened bread and roasted grain on that very day. And the manna ceased, like we just read. So why did the Israelites eat from the produce of the land of Israel only after Passover, and not immediately upon entering the land of the 10th of Nisan? The verse says they ate from the produce of the land the day after Passover. That is the day after the first day of the holiday on the 16th of Nisan. Okay, so, right, we said there's the first holiday, the holiday of the 14th, which is the Passover sacrifice. On the 15th is the Seder, okay, the Passover Seder that we do. And on the 16th, okay, is the day we start counting the Omer. Why do we do that? Because the people of Israel started eating from the fruit of the land only after Passover. So to answer the question of why do they only eat from the land, the grain of the land only on the day after Passover, okay, we need to look at Leviticus, the book of Leviticus, where it says, and you shall not eat bread or roasted grain or fresh ears until this very day, until you have brought the offering of your God. It is a statute forever throughout your generations and all your settlements. And you shall count for yourself from the day after the Sabbath, from the day you bring the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 complete weeks they shall be. That's the Omer. Until the day after the 7th Sabbath, you shall count 50 days, and then you shall bring a new grain offering to the Lord. So these verses refer to the prohibition of Chadash, new grain. Its essence is this: in the temple, a grain offering from the new harvest, the Omer, was brought on the 16th of Nisan, the first day of Chol HaMoed, the intermediate days of Passover. Until this offering was made, it was forbidden to eat from the new grain of that year. After the offering was brought, it became permitted for individuals to eat from the new grain. So now the meaning of the verse is clear. When the verse in Joshua, bread, roasted grain, and fresh ears, products made from grain, you shall not eat until this very day, the 16th of Nisan, until you have brought the offering of your God, meaning the Omer offering from the new harvest. So now we also understand the verse in the book of Joshua, they ate from the produce of the land on the day after Passover, meaning the 16th of Nisan, the day after the first festival day, unleavened bread and roasted grain on that very day. On the 16th of Nisan, the Israelites ate from the new produce of the land. Okay, so we have here a connection to the Bible. The Bible tells us the day after Passover, after the Sabbath, okay? The day after the Sabbath, which means after the holiday, which is the 16th day, that's when you start eating from the new produce. And that custom remained all along, and that's why in the book of Joshua, they only eat it on the 16th day of Nisan, okay? Why did they wait until the 16th day of Nisan and not eat the grain immediately? Because of that prohibition that we just read. Okay, and now another big question is, what is the meaning of the day after the Sabbath? Our sages in the time of the Second Temple interpreted the day after the Sabbath, Mimacharat Shabbat, to mean the day after Passover, and understood the word Sabbath not as referring to the 7th day of the week, Saturday, but rather to a day of rest from labor, a festival day in this case, because sometimes Sabbath, okay, is the 7th day, but sometimes Sabbath also refers to a holiday day, Shabbat, Shabbaton, right? Okay, so we begin counting the Omer on the 16th day, and Shavuot always falls 7 weeks after the first day of Passover. Okay, so we count the Omer, which is 49 days, plus from the day of after Passover, and it always falls, the holiday of Shavuot always falls then. Why is this so important? Because the Sadducees, okay, that were active during the Second Temple period and rejected the authority of the sages, the rabbis, they interpreted the verse, the day after the Sabbath, literally as referring to Sunday, the first day of the week. According to their view, the Omer offering always had to be brought on a Sunday, not specifically on the 16th of Nisan. So therefore, for example, okay, if the Sabbath, if the holiday was on Thursday, they would not start counting the Omer on the 16th, on Friday, which is the 16th. They started counting the Omer, okay, on the 18th of Nisan, which would be a Sunday. And that created chaos and havoc, because some people celebrated the holiday of Shavuos, okay, on the 6th day of Sivan, and some celebrated it like 3 or 4 or 5 days later. And that would be impossible. Like everyone has like different holidays, and they have a lot of fights over that, but they followed sort of like the literal interpretation of the Bible. Okay, and that wasn't good. That created a lot of confusion and fighting among the Jews on what's the right day to celebrate that. And what happened at the end really was that the Pharisees, which is like sort of like the sect that we follow today, has won. And the reason is because of this verse in Joshua that says that it happened that they ate from the Omer, the first grain of the land. They ate it the day right after they entered, the day right after Passover, and that's why the rabbis also interpreted it as that day, and not Sunday. Okay, so that's a little bit a learned piece about why that happened that way. And another interesting part is about the manna that ceased. Okay. And on the Maimonides says about the manna cease, Israel entered into the covenant by way of three rites: circumcision, immersion, and sacrifice. Circumcision took place in Egypt. Immersion took place in the wilderness before the revelation of the Torah. Okay, and the manna, to recall, began to fall shortly after the crossing of the Red Sea, and remained a fixture of the Israelites' diet throughout their sojourn in the wilderness. To cite Exodus, the children of Israel ate the manna for 40 years until they reached settled country. They ate manna until they came onto the edge of the land of Canaan. And throughout their divinely guided trek through the wilderness, the pillars of cloud and flame were adequate reminders of their elevated religious state. Now that they were entering the land of Israel and were about to assume the responsibility for maintaining their own spirituality, they needed to resume circumcision as a sign of their particularity and replace the manna from heaven with the 7 species for which the land of Israel is praiseworthy. So there's a 7
particularity.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so the 7 species of the land of Israel, the land flowing with milk and honey, you got to do something with it. It's not just going to flow to your mouth like the manna. You have to work hard for it. And that's what it means to be sovereign in your own land. To conclude this chapter, once when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a figure standing before him, drawn sword in hand. Joshua went up to him and asked him, "Are you one of us or of our enemies?" He replied, "No, I am captain of God's host. Now I have come." Joshua threw himself face down to the ground and prostrating himself said to him, "What does my Lord command his servant?" The captain of God's host answered Joshua, "Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you stand is holy." And Joshua did so. Okay, and that's how our chapter ends. Okay, and here is a 19th century engraving showing Joshua, okay, the warrior, and the God's angel, okay, God's captain, an angel sent by God to tell Joshua about sort of like empowering him in that sense. Now the captain says, "Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you stand is holy." Did we hear that before?
Moses, when he went up to the mount.
Okay. When he went, but what was there? There was like, what did Moses see?
Saw God in the burning bush.
The burning bush, okay? He saw the burning bush, and the burning bush kept on burning, okay?
Wasn't consumed.
It was never consumed. So he was very curious, and Moses approached that bush, and he suddenly hears this voice, "Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you stand is holy."
Well,
Okay.
the other,
Why does this appear here in the book of Joshua?
Connection.
What's the connection? Okay,
Joshua's about
leadership. Okay, we talked about it also in our previous chapters. Joshua is a new leader. He is scared to death because he now needs to lead the people of Israel. And he knows how difficult they could be. For 40 years, they complained and complained, and they wore down Moses,
Yeah.
okay? That he was like so upset with them that he hit the rock, And his punishment was Moses was not able to enter the land of Israel because of the people of Israel drove him crazy. Okay, like a child drives you crazy. Okay, so Joshua is very concerned. He's like, how am I going to lead these people? These people are very difficult. Okay, you see the people of Israel today, are we all united and happy and living in peace? No, right? It's in our DNA, right? So Joshua is concerned and he doesn't know how he will make it. So God keeps sending him messengers saying to him, don't worry, I will be with you. Right? We read Chazak ve'ematz, be strong and hold on to the mission. Okay. And one of the ways is by sending this angel with a sword, okay, is giving him sort of like the power, saying like, I'm God, I'm God's messenger, and I'm sending you out to battle in the name of God. Don't worry. When you go and conquer the land of Israel, I will be with you. This is like a personal psychological mechanism to strengthen Joshua with the mission of leading the people of Israel into battle. Okay. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is that it's interesting that the holy place that Moses was standing on was in the desert, was outside the land of Israel. Now, how do we call the land of Israel? We call it the Holy Land. Okay, so we would presume any place in Israel should be holy, but no, not every place is holy. Here, where this angel is standing, that's what makes it holy. So you have to also follow God's ways for the place to be holy. If you don't follow God's ways, the place will not be holy. And we know that because of the destruction of the first and second temple, that God kicked out the people of Israel out of the land of Israel for not following his ways. So this is also a reminder to Joshua, it's very good that you're going to go and conquer this land, but don't forget to walk and follow in God's ways, okay? For that is where and why I will be with you. If you don't do it, I will not be with you, okay? So this is sort of like chapter 5, interesting chapter, right? That has all these things, and then the next week, we're going to talk about all the